Hey everybody. A big part of today's activity is what we call chromatography, and that's a process of taking a mixture and separating the parts of that mixture using a solution and chromatography paper. Or in the classroom, I usually use filter paper as my chromatography paper. It does the same thing. So I'm going to explain what chromatography is real quick so that you understand what's really going on. So I used to, when I taught biology, I would use chromatography to separate the different chlorophyll and carotenoids and other pigments out of leaves. So we would take a piece of chromatography paper, and it's just a long strip, and I would take a leaf. Most of the leaves are green, so I would take a leaf and I would use a quarter or some type of coin that has a rough edge, because you want to rub the color from the leaf onto the chromatography paper. And so there'd be this very large line of green across the chromatography paper. And then I would take that chromatography paper and I would dip it into rubbing alcohol, because most of the pigments found in leaves, the chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B, those are soluble in alcohol. And what that means is they dissolve in alcohol. We'll learn about solubility later, but for right now, just remember that if it's soluble, it means that it dissolves in that type of liquid. So here, for most of the pigments, I use rubbing alcohol, and so I dip the end of the chromatography paper into the rubbing alcohol. And over time, that rubbing alcohol moves up the chromatography paper. So the rubbing alcohol basically dissolves and moves up against gravity, capillary action, to move up. And by the end of it, and it can take a while, but by the end of it, the level of alcohol has moved all the way up to the top of the chromatography paper. Now, the pigments and all the things in the leaf, they form a mixture with the alcohol. So as they dissolve, they're not creating a new substance. They're not creating a new thing. You still have the pigments. You still have the alcohol. They're just mixed together. That's a mixture. And some of the pigments are larger than others. Some are smaller. And the larger pigments, of course, they have a larger surface area. Smaller pigments have less mass. And so what happens is, as you look at density, as you look at surface area of an object, those are the factors that cause those things to float. So if you put different objects into water, some would sink, some would float, and it all depends on their density. It all depends on the surface area in contact with the water. All right, so we have the same thing that's happening here. As the alcohol moves up the chromatography paper, it mixes with the pigments in the leaf, and it forms that mixture. And as the alcohol continues to move up, those smaller molecules, the smaller pigments, move up. Let me grab a different color. The smaller molecules will move up the paper with the alcohol, and it'll form a layer on the chromatography paper. So basically, as the alcohol is moving up the chromatography paper, it's carrying those smaller particles along with it. And eventually, once those small particles get too high and the alcohol can't carry them anymore, then they stay right there at that level on the chromatography paper. So we'll have smaller particles up here. This up here is all pure alcohol. And then we'll have down here, I'm sorry, I don't have a yellow marker. Otherwise, I would use that. But down here, we're going to have the heavier particles. So the heavier pigments stay down here, while the lighter pigments get carried further up on the chromatography paper. All right? So this is one of those ways that we can separate a mixture. We have different pieces, different particles, different substances within that mixture, and we're using alcohol and gravity to separate those different parts out. All right, so keep that in mind as you are completing today's activity. We're looking at the crime scene of Barbie doll, and you're going to try to figure out who committed the crime. So keep this in mind as you're looking at the final test to figure out who did it. If you need any help, you know how to get a hold of me. Thanks. Bye.